Hello everybody, this is Jason Heires. This is My Essential Albums Volume Lucky 13. And today we're going to talk about who I think is probably one of the, if not the most underrated rock band in the world, and that is Jefferson Airplane. And this is their fourth album, released in 1968, and it's called Crown of Creation. Here's the album cover for you. Alright, so Jefferson Airplane is a very interesting band. You have a set of really diverse personalities, and it kind of made for some interesting chemistry. But it also kind of doomed it in a weird sort of way. But at this point in time, the band's still pretty together. Everybody's working together. There's a good chemistry. Jefferson Airplane in this era produced some really great live shows full of improvisation, well-known improvisational band. They never really played anything quite the same live twice. And this album is their fourth album, and it's arguably their best album. I kind of favor After Bathing at Baxter's a little bit more than this one, which is their third album, but this one is more like true Jefferson Airplane, but it's more accessible than Baxter's is. So this is a good compromise album if you want to hear what a real Jefferson Airplane album sounds like, and but you want something that's a little bit more accessible. So this is a pretty psychedelic album, and it's got a lot of really good songs in it. Some really classic Jefferson Airplane songs. There's Greasy Heart, which is a little Grace Slick penned thing about sexuality. There's Triad, which is actually a David Crosby song that Crosby, Stills, and Nash rejected because it's about basically living as a threesome, which I guess David Crosby actually did in real life. And it also has a Water Brothers reference, which is a Heinlein reference, which a lot of these guys were big sci-fi, and Heinlein was a big influence on a lot of these guys. There's Star Trek, which is a Jorma song, which is really great and has a lot of great guitar player, and it has some really cool lyrics. And then there's a couple of Marty songs. If You Feel is a really great song. There's the classic Crown of Creation, which is a pure Paul Kantner kind of song, very Paul Kantner. And so it's a really, really good album. There's just really no bad song. It kind of bookends After Bathing at Baxter's, because After Bathing at Baxter's has a song called The Battle of You, Me, and Pooneil, The Ballad of You, Me, and Pooneil. And this album, the last song is called The House at Pooneil Corners. Now, Pooneil is a double reference for Winnie the Pooh, and also Fred Neil, who was a very influential folk singer for the band, especially for Paul Kantner. So, I mean, this album gets my highest recommendation. It's a really great album. Instrumentally, it's fantastic. Jack Casady is definitely the most underrated rock and roll bass player. Jorma Kaukonen, the lead guitar player, is also great. The three-part harmonies that are the Jefferson Airplane trademark for vocals is always really good. And it's as good of an album as it gets. Now, here's the thing that a lot of Jefferson Airplane people, or people that know about Jefferson Airplane, they get a little confused and they kind of wonder what's going on. And I'm going to do a really quick explanation. So you have the big two, which were released off of Surrealistic Pillow, and that, of course, is White Rabbit and Somebody to Love, and everybody knows those two songs. But, they released so many more songs beyond that. But the thing about Airplane is it kind of split into kind of factions. There was Jorma and Jack, the guitar player and the drum and the bass player. They were kind of one faction. And then Grace Slick and Paul Kantner, who Grace Slick was the second singer, and Paul Kantner was the rhythm guitar player and one of the primary songwriters, split up into another camp. They had Marty Balin, who is the lead vocalist, who was kind of in the middle of all this. Now, ideologically, they kind of pulled at each other, and eventually Marty got tired of being stuck in the middle, so he left the band, and they released 2 albums after that, and with Jorma and Jack and the Grace and Paul Camp. Now, what happened is eventually the band split up, and Jorma and Jack went on to form their own side project, which already kind of existed, called Hot Tuna. And so they went on and they did their own thing, and Jorma did his own solo records and everything like that. Now, Paul Kantner had already been doing side projects, and he had a project that he labeled as being Jefferson Starship. And that album was called Blows Against the Empire. It was actually Paul Kantner and Jefferson Starship, and the wide array of different San Francisco area guest musicians from the Grateful Dead and from, Crosby, Stills, and Nash, and all sorts of people from all over the place were guest stars on this record. It was like a who-who of the hippie music scene. And anyway, so when they split up, Paul Kantner and Grace Slick continued with the Jefferson Starship concept, and they changed it and they made it into its own band. Eventually, Marty Balin got brought back into the Jefferson Starship fold for a couple of albums, and that's where songs like Miracles come from. And they did a few more albums, and then Marty got fed up again and left the group. And they brought in Mickey Thomas. Now, Mickey Thomas, he did a song like Fooled Around and Fell in Love. And when Mickey Thomas came into the fold with Jefferson Starship, they started to become very, very commercial. Plus, there was a relationship between Paul and Grace, and they split up. And basically, Paul got kind of fed up with the band Jefferson Starship, and he left the band. Now, the issue with that is that there was a big legal issue because Paul Kantner was the one who coined Jefferson Starship, and it was his band. So when they did the big lawsuit to settle it out, Paul Kantner was given the rights to Jefferson Starship as a name, and the rest of the band was able to call themselves Starship. This was what came out of the lawsuit. So for a long time, Starship and Jefferson Starship coexisted at the same time. As a matter of fact, they still kind of do. Even without Paul Kantner, which is kind of strange, I believe Jefferson Starship still tours even today. But the thing about it, and even Starship still tours today without Grace Slick or any of the original members anymore, just Mickey Thomas. So the long story short is this is how we go from Jefferson Airplane, which is one of the greatest rock bands of all time, to Starship, which is one of the most commercially shitty pop-oriented bands ever. I mean, even Grace Slick admits straight out in interviews that they were in it for the money. So if you ever wonder about why Jefferson Airplane became Starship, that's why. And it was a very long project or process. It went through a lot of permutations. Various band members from Jefferson Airplane worked together in various side projects, and so it's not just a clean split. Like for instance, Jack Casady played in a band with Balin and Kantner called the KBC Band, and there's all sorts of different things. It's a very messy melange of people. But the Jefferson Airplane catalog, if you look at all the musicians that were in Jefferson Airplane and recorded albums, is a very rich and very cool catalog of music, and it's definitely worth exploring. So I know that was a really long explanation, but I hope that makes sense to you. Anyway, Crown of Creation, great album. Leave comments. Thank you again. Goodbye.